Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the sticky cobblestones of a medieval town. The first thing that hits you isn't the view of crooked timber houses leaning over the streets, or even the echo of church bells in the distance. It's the smell. It's thick, sour, and clings to the inside of your nose like glue. You tug your cloak closer, though honestly, no amount of fabric is going to save you from this sensory assault. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you'd comment your location and the local time where you're watching from. It's always wild to imagine this little journey spanning time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a step forward and it squelches. The street isn't paved with neat stone slabs or friendly asphalt. It's a patchwork of mud, animal droppings, and the leftovers from someone's chamber pot. The entire town feels alive, not just with people bustling about, but with rats darting between piles of refuse. You try not to think about how those same rats will become infamous carriers of disease in the not-so-distant future. In this world, bathing is rare, at least for most folks. You hear someone mutter, "Why bother? Dirt keeps the sickness away." A quirky belief, sure, but not uncommon. Historians still argue whether people genuinely thought washing opened the pores to evil vapors, or if it was simply too inconvenient in a world where heating water required chopping wood, hauling buckets, and hoping the bathhouse wasn't condemned by the local preacher. It's late afternoon, and shopkeepers are closing up. You pass a butcher's stall where hunks of meat dangle in the open air, flies buzzing happily. A woman with red raw hands scrubs laundry in the brown water of a nearby trough. Her effort is noble, but you can't help noticing the rinse water looks dirtier than the shirts she dunks into it. Somewhere nearby a bell tolls, calling people to evening prayer, and you realize that spiritual cleanliness mattered far more than physical hygiene. Your shoes sink into another patch of muck and you wrinkle your nose. Here's a fun tidbit. Medieval shoes were made of thin leather with almost no sole, which means if you were unlucky, you weren't just stepping on mud, you were stepping in mystery stew. And no, it wasn't the kind served in taverns. A dog barks and runs past you, and for a brief moment you laugh at how this whole scene feels like a video game level set to nightmare difficulty. You glance down a side alley where kids chase each other barefoot. They don't even flinch when they splash through puddles you would pay serious money to avoid. Resilience or just obliviousness? You decide not to dwell too much. One mainstream fact you recall is that many towns actually had ordinances about where waste could be thrown. In theory, people weren't supposed to just dump chamber pots into the street. In practice, enforcement was laughably poor. After all, when your options are hauling a bucket half a mile to the river or just leaning out the window, human laziness usually wins. Some say you can grow used to anything, but here, the scent is so thick it feels like you're chewing it. And in the distance, a market cries with energy. Merchants hawking salted fish, dried beans, coarse bread. It's an odd contrast, life buzzing on top of decay. Historians still argue whether medieval townsfolk even noticed the stench or if they simply ignored it like background noise. You step carefully forward, trying to stay balanced on the drier patches of straw thrown down to soak up sludge. They don't help much. And just as you're getting into rhythm, a splash from above reminds you of another grim truth. People lived right on top of each other. Waste disposal was vertical. The warning cry of Gardilou, a medieval shout meaning watch out below, isn't just legend, it's survival. And you, poor traveller, just realised you didn't hear it in time. Luckily, tonight's imagination only leaves you with the idea of a splash, not the reality. Still, you chuckle to yourself. Congratulations, you've survived your first block in medieval Europe. But don't get too comfortable. This was only the opening plunge. The The filth runs deeper, stranger, and sometimes darker than you'd dare guess. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this world for more than a week, but at least in this sleepy narration, you can pretend you do. You shake off the memory of that unfortunate splash and keep trudging along, following a narrow lane that bends toward the sound of trickling water. The lane opens into a courtyard glowing with torchlight, and there it is, a bathhouse. Steam curls upward from its roof vents, mingling with the chill of evening. The sight feels oddly inviting, like stumbling across a spa in the middle of chaos. But in the medieval world, stepping inside wasn't just about getting clean. You hover at the doorway, the warm air brushing against your face. Once upon a time, public bathhouses were all the rage. Roman culture had left a legacy across Europe, and medieval towns embraced communal bathing with gusto. People gathered to soak in large wooden tubs, gossip, make business deals, even eat and drink while lounging in the hot water. For a moment you imagine slipping in, sighing with relief as centuries of grime melt off. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were ever truly hygienic, or if they were basically giant bacterial soup. Clean water wasn't exactly plentiful, and the same tubs might host dozens of people before anyone thought to change it. And when you think about the state of medieval plumbing, well, let's just say you wouldn't trust it for your next spa day. Inside, laughter echoes. You hear splashes and voices humming with tipsy merriment. Some folks sip weak ale while soaking because, yes, alcohol was often safer than the water. A quirky tidbit, some bathhouses even served meals right in the water, platters floating on little wooden boards. Imagine dunking bread into stew while your toes brush against someone else's knee. Charming, right? At first, communal bathing was seen as healthy and even virtuous. But over time, suspicion crept in. Preachers warned that naked bodies sharing water invited sinful temptation. The Church began to frown upon these steamy gatherings, linking them with immorality. Worse still, outbreaks of plague and syphilis later made bathhouses look like dens of disease. The once beloved tubs became symbols of corruption, avoided by the very people who once relied on them. You picture a medieval merchant defending himself. "I only go for the relaxation." Sure, buddy, the authorities weren't convinced. And so, bathhouses slowly closed, replaced by a growing culture of dry washing, using cloths to wipe the body or perfume to mask the odor. You linger at the threshold, watching men and women pass through separate doors, though everyone knows what happens once they're inside. The air is heavy with herbs, rosemary and sage tossed into the water in an effort to purify it. You almost laugh at the irony. People believed the herbs kept disease away, even as they swirled shoulder to shoulder with strangers carrying every possible skin infection. Still, you can't help but feel the temptation. Warmth, chatter, the illusion of cleansing. It's better than the icy wash basin back at your rented cot. You imagine sliding in, closing your eyes, trying not to think about what might be floating nearby. Maybe you'd even convince yourself the rosemary really works. A rat scurries across the entrance step, breaking the spell. You chuckle, realizing the so-called oasis is just as flawed as the streets outside. Historians still argue whether medieval people abandoned bathing entirely or just shifted to more private practices. But one thing is certain, the communal bathhouse's golden age fizzled out. What remains now is the faint scent of herbs, the memory of laughter, and the lingering suspicion that cleanliness and sin were hopelessly entangled. You turn away, tugging your cloak tighter. Behind you, a roar of laughter erupts as someone splashes too hard, sending a wave over the tub's edge. For a second, you envy them, carefree in their warm, murky water. But you remind yourself you're only passing through this world in imagination. If you actually had to soak there, you'd probably catch something that no medieval doctor could cure. So you step back into the night, following the crooked lane once more. The air is colder, the shadows deeper. You leave behind the warm steam of the bathhouse, carrying with you a mix of fascination and disgust. And ahead, the town holds more secrets about how people coped, or failed to cope, with the grime of daily life. You make your way deeper into the town, the bathhouse warmth fading quickly as the damp evening air creeps back under your cloak. The lane narrows again, hemmed in by tall, overhanging houses, whose crooked beams seem to lean in as if gossiping over your head. And here, in this tight passage, you stumble across one of the most memorable features of medieval hygiene, the chamber pot. You don't see it right away, you hear it. A sudden scrape of a shutter, a grunt of effort, and then a suspicious splash hits the cobbles just a few feet ahead of you. If this were an interactive ride, you'd have gotten the front row seat experience. A woman above shouts something quick and sharp, something like, "Gardiloo," the traditional warning cry. You mutter under your breath, "Thanks for the notice," though it doesn't sound particularly heartfelt. Yes, chamber pots. That's where most people did their business. A ceramic or wooden bowl kept under the bed or in a corner, and when it filled, you didn't march it out to a proper sewer system, because there wasn't one. You just hurled the contents straight into the street. The alleys you're walking now doubled as open sewers, and everyone shared them. Townsfolk, pigs, stray dogs, and the unfortunate traveller just trying to get home without catching something unpronounceable. You glance down at the mess seeping between the cobblestones. Imagine the morning routine here, dodging puddles, stepping carefully, but inevitably slipping into something unpleasant. Mainstream fact. Many medieval towns actually had laws against this. Some cities insisted residents haul waste to designated dumping points outside the walls. But as with most rules in history, the gap between theory and practice was about as wide as the smell was strong. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Not everyone threw waste directly. In some households, especially wealthier ones, servants were tasked with carrying pots down to larger cesspits. These pits could get so enormous and foul that specialized workers, nicknamed gong farmers, were paid to clean them out at night. Picture the world's worst job, climbing down into a stinking hole with just a shovel and a lantern. They were well paid, but you have to wonder what their dating lives were like. And yet, historians still argue whether medieval folk were as unbothered by all this as we imagine. Did they wrinkle their noses every morning, or did the smell fade into the background hum of daily life, like traffic noise for us today? Some records suggest visitors from cleaner parts of the world were horrified by European streets, while locals just shrugged and carried on. You edge along the wall trying to avoid the wettest patches, but there's no escaping the reality. Shoes get caked, hems of clothing drag through muck, and all of it tracks straight into homes and markets. Suddenly you understand why medieval physicians were obsessed with bad airs and miasmas. Standing here, you might believe disease really did float on foul smells. A man lumbers past you, balancing a full pot. He looks determined, muttering something about not missing the dung heap this time. You step aside, giving him as much space as possible. He tips the pot into a gutter running down the center of the lane, then wipes his hands on his tunic as if that's solved everything. You resist the urge to applaud. Overhead, another shutter creaks and you instinctively duck. Nothing falls this time, but the tension lingers. You start to realize that walking through a medieval street wasn't just unhygienic, it was a contact sport. And still, life bustled on. Children played tag right here, chasing each other between puddles. Merchants laid out bread and cheese on tables just feet away, swatting flies and calling to customers. A dog curls up in the muck, unconcerned. For them, this wasn't shocking. It was Tuesday. As you walk on, you can't help but glance up at the dark windows overhead, half expecting another pot to tip. Maybe you should have brought an umbrella, not for rain, but for self-defense. You laugh softly at the thought, imagining a medieval villager holding a canopy not of silk but of waxed leather, muttering, best investment I ever made. The street bends, the stench lingers, and you press forward. You're learning quickly that in this world, personal space doesn't exist, and neither does plumbing. And the worst part, you've only scratched the surface of how waste-shaped daily life. Ahead, the next cup of water might be waiting, and it won't exactly be sparkling clean. You've survived the chamber pot gauntlet. Barely. Your shoes are not what they once were, and frankly, you're not sure you'll ever look at cobblestones the same way again. But the street opens up, curving toward a small square where villagers gather around a well. The sound of sloshing buckets and chatter mixes with the smell of damp rope, wood, and, of course, everything else floating invisibly in the air. You approach, a little thirsty from your long wander, and you think, finally, a clean drink. After all, water drawn fresh from the earth feels like it should be pure, like something wholesome out of a fairy tale. But medieval life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you, and this well is no exception. Here's the reality check. Water in medieval towns was usually anything but safe. Wells were often dug in courtyards directly above cesspits, or right next to streets lined with open waste. It didn't take much for contaminated runoff to seep through the soil and taint the source. One mainstream fact: outbreaks of dysentery and cholera-like illnesses regularly swept through towns because people drank from water supplies they thought were safe but were actually poisoned with human and animal waste. You watch a woman lower her bucket, the rope squeaking against the wooden spindle. She hauls it back up, splashes a bit on her apron, and hands a dipper to her son. He gulps without hesitation, then wipes his mouth on his sleeve. You wince, already imagining the consequences. But to him, this is normal, and maybe you think his stomach has grown strong from years of exposure. Still, even locals knew something was off. Many preferred weak beer or ale since the brewing process, boiling water, adding hops, fermenting, killed at least some of the lurking microbes. Children drank it, workers drank it, even monks drank it in staggering amounts. A quirky tidbit: in some monasts, Terry's records suggest each monk was allotted up to a gallon of ale a day. Can you picture a bunch of sleepy holy men shuffling around tipsy on liquid bread? It makes the cloisters feel a lot more lively. But what about those who couldn't afford endless barrels of ale? Some turned to rivers. You walk a little farther, crossing a creaky wooden bridge over a sluggish stream. It looks peaceful in the twilight, the surface shimmering like melted bronze. But a quick glance upstream ruins the illusion. You spot a tanner's workshop dumping leftover chemicals, hides and dyes straight into the water. Just beyond, laundry women scrub clothes vigorously, beating them against rocks. And downstream, that's where people collect buckets for drinking and cooking. You shake your head. Welcome to the medieval version of shared resources. Historians still argue whether people understood the connection between dirty water and illness. Some writings suggest they did notice a pattern: bad water, sick neighbours. Others argue they blamed it on the alignment of planets, or miasmas, those poisonous airs believed to float around in foul-smelling places. And honestly, when the whole world stank, how could you tell which odour carried death and which one just carried yesterday's fish stew? You've survived the chamber pot gauntlet. Barely. Your shoes are not what they once were, and frankly, you're not sure you'll ever look at cobblestones the same way again. But the street opens up, curving toward a small square where villagers gather around a well. The sound of sloshing buckets and chatter mixes with the smell of damp rope, wood, and, of course, everything else floating invisibly in the air. You approach, a little thirsty from your long wander, and you think, finally, a clean drink. After all, water drawn fresh from the earth feels like it should be pure, like something wholesome out of a fairy tale. But medieval life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you, and this well is no exception. Here's the reality check. Water in medieval towns was usually anything but safe. Wells were often dug in courtyards directly above cesspits, or right next to streets lined with open waste. It didn't take much for contaminated runoff to seep through the soil and taint the source. One mainstream fact: outbreaks of dysentery and cholera-like illnesses regularly swept through towns because people drank from water supplies they thought were safe but were actually poisoned with human and animal waste. You watch a woman lower her bucket, the rope squeaking against the wooden spindle. She hauls it back up, splashes a bit on her apron, and hands a dipper to her son. He gulps without hesitation, then wipes his mouth on his sleeve. You wince, already imagining the consequences. But to him, this is normal, and maybe you think his stomach has grown strong from years of exposure. Still, even locals knew something was off. Many preferred weak beer or ale since the brewing process, boiling water, adding hops, fermenting, killed at least some of the lurking microbes. Children drank it, workers drank it, even monks drank it in staggering amounts. A quirky tidbit: in some monasteries, Terry's records suggest each monk was allotted up to a gallon of ale a day. Can you picture a bunch of sleepy holy men shuffling around tipsy on liquid bread? It makes the cloisters feel a lot more lively. But what about those who couldn't afford endless barrels of ale? Some turned to rivers. You walk a little farther, crossing a creaky wooden bridge over a sluggish stream. It looks peaceful in the twilight, the surface shimmering like melted bronze. But a quick glance upstream ruins the illusion. You spot a tanner's workshop dumping leftover chemicals, hides and dyes straight into the water. Just beyond, laundry women scrub clothes vigorously, beating them against rocks. And downstream, that's where people collect buckets for drinking and cooking. You shake your head. Welcome to the medieval version of shared resources. Historians still argue whether people understood the connection between dirty water and illness. Some writings suggest they did notice a pattern: bad water, sick neighbors. Others argue they blamed it on the alignment of planets, or miasmas, those poisonous airs believed to float around in foul-smelling places. And honestly, when the whole world stank, how could you tell which odor carried death and which one just carried yesterday's fish stew? You pass by a row of barrels outside a tavern. A brewer stirs his latest batch of ale, sweat dripping into the froth, though no one seems to mind. The place smells richer, earthier, a mix of yeast and roasted grain. For a moment you almost sigh with relief. At least here the drink might not kill you immediately. You imagine yourself leaning against the bar, pint in hand, while a lute strums in the background. But then your host cheerfully admits, "Aye, this batch was brewed from river water after the pigs were through with it." You cough into your sleeve, suddenly less thirsty. Your cloak flutters in the breeze as you move along, and a memory from earlier flickers. The bathhouse herbs tossed into water, rosemary and sage. People had a strange faith in plants as purifiers, whether boiled in brews or steeped in wells. You recall stories of villagers dropping hot irons into barrels, believing the metal would somehow cleanse the liquid. Others added spices like cinnamon or cloves, not to kill germs, but to cover the taste. It's almost poetic, humanity's long, fumbling experiment in survival, centuries before microscopes revealed the real culprits. Then you stumble upon a curious sight. At the edge of town, near a field, sits a carved stone basin filled with clear, bubbling spring water. It glistens under the moonlight, fresh and inviting. You kneel down, splash some on your hands, and almost dare to sip. Springs like these were treasured, often seen as holy, marked by crosses or shrines. Pilgrims travelled miles to drink, believing the water carried healing powers. Some shrines became famous for miracle cures. Was it placebo? Was it genuinely cleaner than town wells? Historians still argue whether these sacred springs offered a rare reprieve or just another illusion. The spring water drips through your fingers, cool and refreshing. For a fleeting moment you think, this is what medieval people must have dreamed of every day, a drink that didn't make you sick. But then a farmer ambles over, leading his cattle straight into the basin for a splashy drink. And just like that, the miracle fades back into reality. You rise, brushing your damp hands on your cloak, and look out over the dark fields. The stars are bright, untouched by smog, and the breeze carries the scent of hay. It's a peaceful moment, yet you can't shake the irony. In a world surrounded by rivers, wells and streams, safe water was still out of reach for most. The danger wasn't scarcity, it was pollution, ignorance and habit. You chuckle to yourself. If you time-traveled here with a single bottle of filtered spring water, you'd be a king. Forget swords and jewels. Hydration would be the ultimate luxury. And as you walk away, leaving the square behind, you take one last glance at the villagers filling buckets. They laugh, chat, carry on, oblivious to the invisible threats lurking in their cups. For them, life moves forward despite the risks. For you, walking in their shoes tonight, every sip is a gamble. You tuck your chin into your cloak, muttering a soft modern joke to yourself. Note to self, when in medieval Europe, stick to beer. The road ahead darkens, the lanterns flicker, and your stomach grumbles. You hope the next stretch of your journey doesn't involve tasting any more medieval refreshments. But the world you're wandering rarely grants such mercy. Your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten in a while, but then you notice another detail about yourself. Your mouth feels fuzzy. Not just the ordinary forgot to brush fuzzy, but the kind that makes you imagine tiny medieval squatters setting up tents along your gums. You run your tongue across your teeth and shudder. Congratulations, you've just stumbled into the world of medieval dental hygiene, or rather, the alarming lack of it. The idea of tooth care back then was wildly different from what you know today. Toothbrushes, as we recognize them, wouldn't become common in Europe until centuries later. In the Middle Ages, if you wanted fresh breath, you had a few makeshift options: chew on parsley, nibble fennel seeds, or crush garlic cloves and hope for the best. Yes, garlic. Imagine leaning in for a romantic chat after dinner and greeting your date with dragon breath that doubles as vampire repellent. Practical, sure. Pleasant? Absolutely not. You pass a small crowd gathered around a market stall where a woman is hawking bundles of herbs, mint, sage, thyme, all pitched as cures for bad breath. She waves a sprig under a man's nose, and he grimaces before chewing it dutifully. This was the medieval equivalent of popping a mint. You smirk, imagining a tagline: Listerine, now with extra rosemary. Mainstream fact: while toothpaste-like substances did exist, they were often abrasive powders made of crushed bone, oyster shells, or even brick dust mixed with vinegar or honey. People rubbed these onto their teeth with cloths or sticks. Sure, it scraped off some grime, but it also wore away enamel like sandpaper. Imagine brushing your teeth with ground-up gravel. Your dentist would faint just thinking about it. As you stroll through the lane, you notice a barber surgeon sign swinging in the wind, a pair of red and white stripes painted on a pole. And here's where your jaw really drops. These weren't just the guys who cut hair. They pulled teeth too. Got a cavity? Sit in the barber's chair, brace yourself against the wooden armrest, and let him yank it out with metal pliers that look suspiciously like tools from a blacksmith's kit. Anesthesia? Nope. At best, you'd get a swig of ale or a wooden stick to bite down on. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some medieval people believed worms caused toothaches. Yes, worms. There are records of toothworms being blamed for throbbing pain, and treatments included smoking herbs directly into your mouth to supposedly drive the creatures out. Picture yourself sitting there, jaw open, while someone blows burning henbane fumes between your molars. Not exactly the spa day you were hoping for. You stop to eavesdrop on two villagers gossiping. One says his neighbour swears by rubbing soot from the fireplace on aching gums. Another insists chewing stale bread crusts strengthens the teeth. Historians still argue whether most medieval folk truly believed in these quirky remedies, or if they were simply grasping at whatever seemed to dull the pain for 5 minutes. And pain was constant. Tooth decay was rampant thanks to coarse bread full of stone-ground grit that literally filed down enamel with every bite. Combine that with sugar creeping into Europe through trade routes, honey before, cane sugar later, and you've got the perfect recipe for disaster. Archaeologists often find medieval skeletons with teeth worn flat, riddled with cavities and abscesses that probably made life unbearable. You grimace as you imagine living with a festering tooth infection, no antibiotics in sight. Left untreated, it could spread and even kill, all from a molar you might casually fix with a root canal today. Suddenly, you feel oddly grateful for your boring electric toothbrush back home. But it wasn't all hopeless. Some wealthier folks tried to keep up appearances. Nobles occasionally rinsed with wine or vinegar solutions, and there are scattered mentions of herbal mouthwashes meant to sweeten the breath. Whether they worked or not is another story. You suspect the servants attending them were too polite to say otherwise. You chuckle quietly at the thought of medieval dating rituals. Imagine someone leaning in to recite poetry by candlelight, only for their breath to smell like a compost heap. Attraction must have relied heavily on tolerance or on both parties being equally pungent. Maybe love really is blind and knows blind. A child runs past you, gnawing on a hunk of hard cheese, smiling wide with several teeth already missing. He laughs without a care, and for a second you feel that familiar human resilience. No matter how grim the conditions, people adjusted. They found humour, remedies, and workarounds. You step aside as the barber surgeon emerges from his shop, wiping his hands on a blood-streaked rag. Behind him, a groan echoes from a poor soul who just underwent medieval dentistry. You shiver, muttering, "I'll take floss over forceps any day." As the lane stretches onward, your mouth feels even drier, your imagination conjuring phantom toothaches. The mix of garlic, grit, and questionable remedies sticks with you, reminding you that medieval hygiene wasn't just about dirty streets, it was inside the body too. Every smile carried its own horror story, hidden behind cracked enamel and herbal breath fresheners. And yet the town bustles on. Jokes are cracked, bread is chewed, kisses are stolen behind timbered walls. For them, toothache was part of life's rhythm, endured alongside muddy shoes and smoky air. For you, it's a vivid reminder that sometimes history isn't just disgusting, it's painfully personal. You walk on, tugging your cloak tighter as the wind whips down the lane. Ahead, torchlight flickers against a row of houses, and you notice something curious. Everyone you pass is bundled in heavy fabric, wool cloaks, fur-lined robes, long gowns dragging across the muck. At first it looks regal, almost cozy, but then you catch a whiff of something sour and realize fashion in the medieval world wasn't just about looking grand, it was about trapping layers of sweat, fleas, and filth right against the skin. Imagine wearing the same outfit every day, week after week, without soap or laundry powder. You'd get attached to it in ways you never intended. Mainstream fact. Clothes in the Middle Ages were expensive, often handmade, so most people owned only a couple of sets at best. Washing them was labour-intensive, so garments were reworn until they could practically walk on their own. And long flowing robes, they didn't just sweep across stone floors, they acted like mops soaking up everything in the street. You brush past a man in a fur-trimmed tunic and something small leaps from his shoulder to yours. You slap it away quickly, realizing it's a flea. Welcome to the true hidden passengers of medieval fashion. Lice, fleas, and mites thrived in the seams of garments, tucked into the folds of cloaks and nestled in collars. People scratched constantly, sometimes until their skin was raw. Some even wore special undergarments coated with wax or grease, hoping pests would stick there instead of crawling onto their bodies. Did it work? Historians still argue whether these bug traps were clever hacks or just wishful thinking. As you walk, you notice women adjusting headdresses and veils, fabric layered tightly over hair. Why? Partly for modesty, partly for fashion, but also because hiding lice was easier than picking them out. A quirky tidbit: medieval mothers sometimes combed their children's hair with fine metal combs, then cracked lice between fingernails and tossed them into the fire. Can you imagine the sound? Tiny popping noises as background music to family life. You overhear two men boasting in a tavern doorway. One brags about a cloak lined with ermine, the status symbol of royalty. The other rolls his eyes, tugging at his patched wool coat. The irony is clear: wealth bought you fancier filth. The noble's cloak looked magnificent, but underneath it he scratched as much as any peasant. Archaeologists have even found lice combs buried with kings and queens, proof that no amount of power kept parasites away. You pause at a laundry yard where women slap clothes against rocks in icy water. Steam rises from a giant cauldron where they boil linens when they had the chance. Washing heavier garments like wool cloaks was rare because soap was costly and the process damaged fabrics. Instead, people aired clothes out, sprinkled them with herbs, or beat the dust out with sticks. A freshly cleaned tunic might smell faintly of lavender, but underneath, the grime lingered. Historians still debate whether medieval folk noticed how grimy their clothing was, or whether they accepted it as the background texture of life. Some records suggest wealthier households changed linen undergarments frequently, considering it a mark of refinement. Others reveal that even nobles kept outer garments unwashed for months, masking the odor with perfumes and furs. You watch as a woman proudly adjusts her long velvet sleeves. They're gorgeous, yes, but they drag through mud puddles and candle wax alike. Another man struts past in a pointed hat so tall it nearly scrapes the doorframe. Medieval fashion wasn't just impractical, it was downright hazardous. Try cooking stew while wearing a trailing gown and a floor-length sleeve, and you'll quickly discover why so many kitchens burned down. And yet, despite the discomfort, people loved their clothes. They stitched embroidery, sewed bright dyes, and bragged about imported fabrics from Italy or the Middle East. To be dirty but stylish was still better than being dirty and plain. You chuckle, realizing that in a way, not much has changed. Except today you can toss your hoodie in the washing machine instead of praying fleas don't move in. A rat scurries across the street, pausing under the hem of a merchant's robe. You grimace, picturing how many critters hitchhiked into homes and beds this way. Fleas spreading plague, lice spreading trench fever centuries later, all thanks to the cozy folds of fashion. It's a chilling thought. The very clothes that marked status also carried death. You continue onward, feeling itchy just from observation. The townsfolk look glamorous in their layered outfits, but you know better. Beneath the velvet and fur, life wriggled with tiny passengers, scratching away dignity one bite at a time. And as you head toward the glow of a barber's pole in the distance, you realize your next stop promises even stranger dualities. The world of grooming, where razors and saws share the same stage. The striped pole comes into sharper focus as you approach, its paint catching the glow of a nearby lantern. Red and white spirals twist upward in a way that feels oddly cheerful, but don't be fooled. This is no cozy barbershop from your local mall. This is the domain of the medieval barber surgeon, a man who could shave your beard in the morning and amputate your leg in the afternoon. You step inside, brushing past a ragged curtain, and the air greets you with a mix of iron, sweat, and the faint sweetness of old blood. A chair sits in the middle of the room, wooden, sturdy, with grooves worn into the armrests from generations of nervous hands gripping tight. On the wall hangs an assortment of tools, razors, scissors, forceps, saws, all gleaming faintly in the flickering light. Some look like grooming instruments. Others look like they belong in a torture chamber. Mainstream fact: barbers in the Middle Ages weren't just for haircuts. They were trained, or sometimes half-trained, in basic surgery. They pulled teeth, lanced boils, stitched wounds, set broken bones, and even performed bloodletting, a common cure for almost every ailment. You can almost hear the barber announcing, "You've got a fever? Excellent. Let's drain a pint or two." You watch as a man sits nervously pointing to a swollen jaw. The barber nods, selects a pair of iron pliers, and with no anesthesia yanks the offending tooth in one brutal tug. The man groans, blood dripping onto the straw floor. The barber pats him on the shoulder, muttering, "All better." You wince, gripping your own jaw in sympathy. A quirky tidbit. That red and white pole outside, it wasn't just decoration. The red symbolized blood. The white represented the bandages used to clean it up. And the pole itself echoed the sticks patients gripped during bloodletting to make their veins bulge. Next time you see a barber pole, remember, it's really a tiny billboard for controlled bleeding. The barber wipes his hands on a rag, then casually shifts gears. He beckons a boy forward, drapes a cloth around his neck, and begins trimming his hair as if switching from medieval surgery mode to stylist mode requires no emotional reset. You almost laugh. It's like if your modern hairdresser said, "Hold still, I'll just stitch up this stab wound before I finish your layers." Historians still argue whether barber surgeons were respected professionals or tolerated necessities. Some sources describe them as skilled artisans, while others paint them as butchers with steady hands and questionable hygiene. After all, sterilization wasn't a thing. Those pliers that yanked a tooth might next lance a boil without so much as a rinse. You linger near the back wall where a jar of leeches floats in murky water. Yes, leeches. Bloodletting wasn't always done with a knife. Sometimes these little wrigglers were applied to suck out bad humours. Patients squirmed, muttering prayers, while the barber assured them the creatures were balancing their health. And in fairness, leeches sometimes worked for conditions like high blood pressure. Still, you're not signing up for the medieval spa package anytime soon. You hear a woman whispering to the barber about her husband's headaches. He recommends trepanation, the drilling of a small hole in the skull to release pressure or evil spirits. You swallow hard. Trepanation has been practiced for millennia, but in this room with these tools, the thought makes your skin crawl. Yet for some patients, it actually relieved symptoms. Others, well, let's just say funerals were brisk business. The barber turns, his apron spattered, and waves you closer as if you're his next customer. You shake your head quickly, joking under your breath. "I'm good, thanks, just in for a trim, maybe in another century." What's striking, though, is how calm the townsfolk are. For them, the barber surgeon is part of everyday life, the one-stop shop for grooming and medical emergencies alike. You scratch your chin thoughtfully, realizing he filled a void where doctors were scarce and priests couldn't cure everything with holy water. In a world without modern hospitals, this was survival, messy and unpolished, but necessary. As you step back into the cool night air, you glance at the pole again. It twirls slightly in the wind, innocent to the untrained eye. But now you know its secret. It's not about style, it's about blood, bandages, and the bizarre marriage of beauty and butchery. And ahead, down a darker street, you hear hushed whispers. The plague has arrived, and hygiene, or the lack of it, will soon take center stage in a way that terrifies everyone. The whispers ride the night air before you even see the people. A group huddles around a fire, their faces tense, voices lowered, and you catch fragments of words. Fever, swelling, rats. A shiver runs down your spine because you already know what they're talking about. This is the creeping arrival of the Black Death, the plague that would sweep across Europe in the 14th century and kill millions. You pause at the edge of the firelight, watching a woman cradle her child. The boy coughs weakly, his cheeks flushed, and though you can't see it yet, you know the dreaded swellings, the buboes, will soon rise under his arms or at his neck. The villagers trade worried glances, some crossing themselves, others muttering charms. They all sense it, something unnatural is moving through their world, and no one knows how to stop it. Mainstream fact: the plague spread partly through fleas carried by rats which thrived in the very filth you've been trudging through. The waste-filled streets, the parasite-ridden clothes, the crowded houses, they were the perfect breeding ground. Hygiene wasn't just bad here, it was deadly. You glance around, realizing that every scratch of a flea, every squeak of a rat in the shadows might spell doom. But what makes it worse is the confusion. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the link between vermin and disease. Some suspected bad air, others blamed foreigners, witches, or the wrath of God. Without microscopes, germs were an invisible enemy, so explanations grew wild. Flagellants whipped themselves in the streets to cleanse society of sin. Towns chased out minorities, accusing them of poisoning wells. Panic had no boundaries, and suspicion clung to every corner. You take a hesitant step forward and notice something odd. Perfume bottles dangling from belts, bunches of herbs tied to cloaks, even hollow canes filled with oil. Bathhouses. With scented flowers, people truly believed sweet smells repelled plague. The wealthy carried pomanders, metal balls filled with cloves or rosemary, pressing them to their noses as they walked. The irony stings. Perfume didn't cure the disease, but it masked the reality of decay. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some medieval doctors advised bathing in vinegar or even rubbing onions on the skin as prevention. Others suggested avoiding baths entirely, fearing that water opened pores to infection. Imagine the dilemma. Should you scrub yourself down with sour wine or proudly stay crusty for safety's sake? Either way, you didn't stand much of a chance. The fire crackles, and you see one man whisper a prayer while tossing herbs into the flames. Another clutches a talisman, insisting it will ward off death. You can't help but think of modern debates when people argue endlessly over cures or prevention strategies. Human history repeats itself, only the costumes change. The plague cart rattles past, its wheels splattered with mud. Inside lie bodies shrouded in rough cloth, their faces hidden, their silence heavier than any sermon. A bell tolls softly, rung by a man with hollow eyes chanting, "Bring out your dead." The sound seeps into your bones. You imagine living here day after day, knowing any cough could mean the end. Historians still argue how hygiene, or the lack of it, shaped the plague's path. Did the filth make it inevitable? Or was it simply chance, an unlucky collision of trade routes, ships, rats and fleas? Some towns survived with fewer losses, while others were almost wiped out. The debate continues, but standing here, watching fear ripple through every gesture, you realize that for these people, explanations didn't matter. Survival was a coin toss. You edge away from the fire, slipping into a narrow street, heart pounding. A cat darts across your path, chasing something in the shadows. A rat squeaks, disappearing into a pile of straw. You wonder if anyone else notices, if anyone else feels the creeping dread that the smallest creature could carry death. But most are too busy clutching charms, dousing themselves in perfume, or praying desperately for deliverance. The air grows heavier as you walk. Every cough you hear echoes louder, every footstep feels slower. The plague has entered the town, and hygiene, or rather, the absence of it, is the stage upon which tragedy will play out. You glance back at the huddled villagers by the fire, their faces pale with fear, and murmur to yourself, this world wasn't just disgusting, it was deadly. And as you round the corner, leaving the whispers behind, a new scent greets you, strong, floral, almost suffocating. Its perfume, heavy and cloying, poured over bodies and clothes to mask what can't be cleansed. Ahead lies another layer of medieval hygiene, or the illusion of it, where fragrance tries to fight filth. You follow that heady trail of scent until it almost feels like the street itself is exhaling flowers. At first, it's pleasant. Rose, orange blossom, maybe a hint of lavender. And then it thickens, cloying, like someone tried to drown a battlefield in potpourri. You cough delicately, which is the medieval equivalent of whispering to your nose, "Hang in there, champ." Ahead, a pair of nobles sweep past, sleeves long and lush, heads held high, each trailing a fragrant wake that bulldozes the stink of the alley for a blissful 3 seconds. Perfume isn't an accessory here, it's armor. You watch a lady pause beneath a lantern and produce a little filigreed sphere, the famous pomander, hinged like a tiny treasure chest. She cracks it open and inside sit compartments packed with clove, cinnamon, crushed rose petals, maybe a chunk of resin. She lifts it to her nose and breathes as if the world suddenly became tolerable. Mainstream fact, from the late Middle Ages into the early Renaissance, pomanders became status markers across Europe, especially in courts where sweet airs were thought to fend off disease and bad luck as much as bad smells. Nobles wore them on chains at the waist or around the neck, sometimes with elaborate enamels that would make a jeweler blush. You remember the bathhouse herbs, rosemary and sage tossed into cloudy water like wishes. This is the upscale sequel. Instead of sitting in a shared soup, you carry your personal cloud, portable and, hopefully, less contagious. The gentleman beside the lady taps his walking stick. It's hollow, capped with a scented plug. He's turned his cane into a sniffing straw, a perfumed periscope for diving through disgusting streets. You smother a grin. Medieval problems met with wonderful medieval gadgetry. First joke of the evening, it's basically aromatherapy on a stick, the original portable diffuser minus the USB port. Our nose twitches again as a servant staggers out of a doorway with a tray of glass vials. Perfume here isn't just floral, it's an entire ecosystem of smells, resins like frankincense and myrrh, spice blends from Venetian traders, and animal-derived notes that add depth. A quirky tidbit, some prized scents came from civet, secretions from a small cat-like mammal, and musk from musk deer, while the most coveted fixative was ambergris, waxy lumps from the guts of sperm whales, aged by the sea until they smelled strangely celestial. Tell people that at a banquet and watch them nod politely while rethinking dessert. You drift closer to a doorway where a perfumer works by candlelight, pestle thudding softly in a mortar. He's not just making pretty smells, he's muting reality. Oils of rose and violet, tinctures of benzoin and storax, waters of orange and rosemary, some distilled, some macerated, some warmed into salves that can be smeared on linen or beard. He sells scented gloves too, leather tanned, then steeped in fragrance so your handshake says, "I'm wealthy and I don't smell like a stable." Historians still argue whether these glove perfuming practices were primarily fashion, prophylactic against miasmas, or opportunistic marketing wrapped in prestige. You suspect the answer is yes. Not everyone can afford a pomander the size of a plum, but even humbler sorts chase sweetness. You glimpse a girl threading dried lavender into a sachet to tuck into her bodice, and a cook scattering mint on rushes across a hall floor, hoping each step releases a scent that politely smothers the last hour's spills. People burn pastilles, little pellets of ground resin on embers to sweeten rooms. Invoke enough pleasant smoke, the logic goes, and the bad air gives up and leaves. If only rats were so polite. A nobleman swans by in a cloak as shiny as a raven's wing, and you catch the shadow side of all this glamour. No one here talks about washing the cloak. You already learned why. Wool warps, furs mat, dyes run, soap costs, so perfume becomes dry cleaning for the soul. A few drops along the collar, a touch at the wrist, and you've camouflaged a month of adventures. Second joke, you're basically applying a medieval filter, Valencia, but for odour. You pause on a threshold as a chaplain debates a merchant about cleanliness. One claims perfumed air pleases God. The other insists true cleanliness is in prayer, not pomanders. You tilt your head, thinking about how belief runs circles around evidence. Historians still argue whether late medieval Europeans really bathed less as moralists denounced bathhouses, replacing water with scent, or whether that's a caricature that ignores countless private washings with basins and cloths. Your nose votes for less water, your sympathy votes for they did what they could. Another detail. You notice gilded cases shaped like pears and apples. Pomanders moulded as fruit to suggest health and Eden. Some open into petals, each compartment holding a different blend. Rose for romance, clove for purifying, rosemary for memory. The lady from before taps one petal closed and another open like a musician changing keys. She passes a beggar and for 2 seconds the alley becomes an orchard. Then the wind shifts and your old friend the chamber pot says hello again. Third joke. Nature is healing. Briefly, then it remembers where it is. A servant sprinkles sweet waters onto linens hanging from an upper window. Rose water, orange blossom water, violet water. Thin distillates that evaporate fast but leave a whisper of cleanliness. Mainstream fact tucked in. The art of distillation for aromatic waters in medieval Europe drew heavily on knowledge transmitted through the Islamic world. Treatises from Arabic-speaking polymaths advanced techniques that let perfumers coax flowers into bottles. That exchange, ideas riding trade winds, gave Europe the nose it needed to cope with its streets. Of course, fragrance also polices class. Sumptuary rules sometimes grumble about excess and markets tax costly ingredients. Smell becomes a social signal, strong enough and refined enough to say I am above the mud, even while your hem quietly soaks it up. You can mask the body, but you can't quite muzzle the city. It's the paradox you've been walking since you stepped on your first squelch, polish and putrefaction holding hands. Next to the perfumer's table stands a bowl of powdered iris root, orris, favoured to scent linen chests and wigs later on. He pinches a bit and dusts a ribbon, explaining that it fixes the bouquet, slows the fade. You think of the plague fires, the herb bundles at belts, the rosemary in bathhouse tubs. Everyone here is trying to fix something, the nose, the fear, the feeling that the world is sliding sideways. Whether it's scent or prayer or garlic on the gums, the goal is the same: control the uncontrollable. You step back into the current of the street, noticing how the perfumes layer, citrus cutting through animal musk, resin hugging the edges, flowers floating above like stained glass for the nose. For a brief, fragile span, you almost forget the gutters. Then a wheel hits a rut and flicks a rude reminder onto your boot. Perfume, you realize, is a promise that can't survive a cart's splash. It blunts reality, it doesn't rewrite it. Historians still argue whether the cult of sweetness materially changed health outcomes or merely changed how people tolerated their environment. Tonight, your verdict is simple. It changed morale, and morale is its own medicine. A noblewoman raises her pomander again, eyes half closed, and you mirror the gesture without the jewellery, just cupping your sleeve to your face and pretending it's bergamot. The trick works surprisingly well. Maybe the brain is easy to bribe. You breathe slowly, feel your shoulders unlock, and let the candle-lit street soften at the edges. The stink is still here. The fleas are still rehearsing. The barber's pole still promises tidy chaos. But for a soft moment you float through a scented tunnel and imagine a cleaner world ahead, if not now, then someday. And when the breeze finally tears the tunnel open and the alley returns to its honest self, you keep walking. The perfumes fade behind you like a chorus, and the city exhales what it always exhales. You smile wryly, thinking, if the Middle Ages had invented a like button, they would have perfumed it. You adjust your cloak and aim for quieter streets, where animals share the hearth and home smells like smoke, wool, and whatever the day tracked in. You step away from the perfume haze and into the darker edges of the town, where the glow of torches fades and only a few hearth fires flicker through shutters. At first you think the streets might be quieter here, maybe even cleaner. But as you duck under a low lintel into a humble cottage, you realize why the noise has shifted. It's not in the street anymore, it's inside. The smell hits you first: smoke, damp wool, manure and stew, all blended into one heavy cloud. The single-room cottage is packed, and not just with people. You count a pig rooting through straw near the door, a pair of chickens fluttering onto a beam, and a scruffy dog curled beside the hearth. A toddler waddles past, clutching a crust of bread, barely missing the pig's snout. In this world, the family home isn't just for humans. It's a full-on Noah's Ark, without the luxury of separate decks. Mainstream fact: in medieval Europe, especially among peasants, animals were often kept indoors. Pigs, goats, chickens, sometimes even a cow. Livestock shared living quarters because barns were costly and predators were real. Animals gave warmth in winter and easy access to food products like milk and eggs. Practical, yes. Hygienic, not remotely. Imagine trying to sleep while your cow snores louder than your spouse. You tread carefully across the rush-covered floor, which has clearly seen better days. Rushes, bundles of reeds or straw, are meant to soak up spills and droppings, but they're not replaced often. More commonly, fresh rushes are scattered on top of old ones, layering years of crumbs, fleas, grease and mystery fluids. A quirky tidbit: archaeologists who've dug under ancient rush layers in castles have found decades' worth of compacted debris. Fish bones, nutshells, lost jewellery, and yes, evidence of insects that once thrived in the bedding. Think of it as medieval carpet. That wriggles, a woman says. Tears a pot over the hearth, smoke curling into the rafters. There's no chimney here, just a small hole in the roof where smoke reluctantly seeps out. You cough as your eyes water, wondering how anyone breathes like this. The walls are blackened, beams shiny with soot. Historians still argue whether smoke-filled cottages reduced lung health or paradoxically killed bacteria and pests. On one hand, chronic coughs and lung disease were common. On the other, smoke may have helped preserve meat or deter insects. A mixed blessing. If you didn't suffocate, you might get fewer lice. Some trade-off. The pig nudges closer, hoping for scraps, and you instinctively step back, right into a pile of chicken droppings. You mutter something sarcastic under your breath, then glance around sheepishly. No one else seems to notice. To them, this isn't disgusting, it's daily life. The animals are part of the family economy, a source of survival. You think of modern pet owners letting their dogs on the couch. Here, the difference is that the pet might be tomorrow's dinner. Another quirky observation: medieval people often believed animals were barometers of health. Cats, for example, were suspected of carrying evil during plague years, leading to mass killings that ironically worsened rat problems. Dogs and pigs were sometimes thought to sense illness in humans, their behavior interpreted as omens. You watch the pig circle the toddler again and wonder if anyone's reading its actions as prophecy. A boy sits cross-legged on the rushes, scratching himself furiously. You already know why. Fleas and lice hop freely between humans and beasts. The warmth of a shared home is heaven for parasites. He grins at you, missing 2 teeth, and you can't help but grin back, though your skin itches in sympathy. You remember the barber's leeches, the noble's perfumes. Suddenly, a child's grin feels like the most honest thing you've seen. The family eats from a shared wooden bowl, each dipping bread into the same stew. You notice they use their fingers more than spoons. Someone coughs into the pot, no one blinks. Germ theory hasn't been invented, and food isn't about hygiene, it's about calories. If you're lucky, the stew bubbles hot enough to kill whatever's lurking. If not, well, survival is still a coin toss. You lean against the wall, soot smudging your cloak, and glance upward. The rafters are alive with movement. Pigeons nest in the beams, feathers drifting down now and then. Some families actually encourage this, believing pigeon droppings could be used as fertilizer. You chuckle at the absurdity. Even the ceiling contributes to the smell. Historians still argue whether peasants accepted this mingling as natural or grumbled about it constantly. Some accounts suggest they valued animals as lifesavers in harsh winters, while others hint at endless complaints about the filth. Likely both were true, depending on the day or the strength of the smell. You shift again as the dog presses against your leg, tail wagging, eyes begging for scraps. For a moment it feels familiar, like any loyal pet in any century. And then the pig squeals, the baby wails, the rooster crows indoors as if it's dawn already. The sheer noise hits you, chaotic and relentless, a lullaby of the medieval household. Stepping back out into the night, you gulp fresh air, even if it carries the stink of waste. The cottage behind you hums with life, messy and unhygienic, but undeniably human. It's survival in its most unpolished form. Animals, smoke, parasites and all. And as you walk toward the looming silhouette of a monastery, you realize not everyone lived like this. Some communities actually clung to routines of order, ritual and cleansing, even if only within cloister walls. The town falls quieter behind you, replaced by the rhythmic toll of a distant bell. Its deep hum draws you toward a cluster of stone walls and peaked roofs, rising like a fortress of silence above the chaos. You approach the gates of a monastery, and the shift feels immediate, as if you've stepped into a parallel world. The stench of waste and livestock fades, replaced by cool air tinged with beeswax and herbs. For the first time tonight, you breathe without flinching. Inside the cloister, monks pad softly across flagstone corridors, their sandals whispering against the floor. Their robes are simple, their heads shaved in the familiar ring of tonsure, and their faces calm in a way that makes you almost envious. Unlike the peasants crammed into smoky cottages, these men live by a rhythm of prayer, work, and, surprisingly, washing. Mainstream fact: monasteries often maintained stricter hygiene routines than the surrounding world. Many had running water systems, channels diverting streams into stone basins or troughs, so monks could wash before meals and prayers. They bathed more frequently than ordinary villagers, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, depending on their order and resources. Compare that to peasants who might bathe once or twice a year, if that, and suddenly the cloister feels like a spa. You linger at a wash basin where a monk methodically scrubs his hands with sand and herbs, the gritty mixture scouring away dirt. Another dips a cloth into warm water, wringing it out to wipe his face. They take cleanliness seriously, not because they're obsessed with vanity, but because purity is linked to spirituality. You smirk at the irony. In a world where perfumes try to hide filth, monks here are literally cleaner than kings. Yet even in this oasis, quirks abound. One brother shuffles past carrying a jar of urine. Yes, urine. Quirky tidbit, urine was sometimes used in laundry for its ammonia content, believed to whiten cloth. Monastic laundries collected it in large vats, soaking robes before rinsing them in fresh water. The image of serene monks standing over barrels of pee is not the holy postcard you expected. Still, the cloister hums with order. Meals are eaten in silence, hands washed beforehand. Communal dormitories are aired, straw bedding replaced more often than in peasant homes. And gardens provide not just food but herbs for cleaning and medicinal purposes. You trail your hand along the edge of a lavender bed, its scent rising crisp and soothing, a sharp contrast to the pigsty aroma still clinging faintly to your cloak. Historians still argue whether monks were genuinely more hygienic than lay people, or if surviving records exaggerate their cleanliness. Some accounts highlight strict washing rules. Others suggest many monasteries grew lax over time, especially when funds ran low. Perhaps it depended on the order, Benedictines emphasizing manual labor and order, Carthusians embracing near total silence and solitude. Either way, compared to the muddy alleys outside, the monastery feels like a bubble of tidiness. You slip into the scriptorium where rows of monks bend over parchment, quills scratching softly. Candles burn steadily, their smoke minimal thanks to well-placed vents. Imagine trying to copy scripture with lice crawling in your robes. It would test anyone's patience. Here, though, you sense a kind of managed calm. One monk pauses, picks a knit from his sleeve, flicks it away, then resumes writing as if nothing happened. Even in this sanctified world, the tiny invaders find a way in. At the infirmary, you peer in to see another surprising scene. Monks tending to the sick. Basins of water line the walls, cloths soaking in herbal infusions. They wash wounds with mixtures of vinegar or honey, sometimes even wine. Compared to the barber surgeon's bloody pliers, this feels almost gentle. You hear soft chanting, a prayer for healing, blending faith with rudimentary medicine. You can't decide whether it's more effective or just more comforting. One monk approaches with a smile, offering you a cup. The liquid is warm, faintly sweet, herbal tea brewed from chamomile and mint. For a fleeting moment, you close your eyes and sigh. In a world of foul water and sour ale, this feels like a miracle. You almost laugh aloud. In a monastery, even a drink becomes spiritual hydration. But don't romanticize it too much. Life here is strict, controlled. The bell dictates every action, and individuality dissolves into routine. And while hygiene is better, it's still not modern. Latrines, known as reredaughters, drop waste into pits that need cleaning. Fleas still lurk in bedding. Smoke still clings to stone. The monastery may be an island of order, but it's not immune to the same forces gnawing at the rest of the medieval world. As you step back into the cloister courtyard, moonlight falls across the square of grass. You feel calmer, as if the rhythm of chanting and washing has rubbed some of the filth off your own journey. But beyond these walls, chaos still rules. Kings in lice-ridden finery, peasants in smoky huts, and streets flowing with everything better left unmentioned. You glance once more at the lavender beds, inhaling deeply. For a moment, it almost convinces you that medieval life had a hidden pocket of peace and cleanliness. But as the bell tolls again, and monks shuffle silently to prayer, you turn away, knowing your path leads back to palaces where myths of grandeur hide very real grime. The monastery's calm lingers in your chest as you descend the hill, but soon the world shifts again. Lanterns flare brighter, banners ripple in the night air, and a sprawling stone palace looms ahead. Towers rise against the stars, windows glowing with candlelight, their leaded panes like jewels in the dark. This is where royalty lives. Grand halls, fine gowns, banquets that glitter with gold. Surely, you think, the kings and queens of the Middle Ages must have enjoyed spotless luxury. Surely their lives were cleaner, brighter, sweeter. Then the palace doors open, and reality tumbles out. The entrance hall is magnificent, no doubt. Polished stone, tapestries stretching floor to ceiling, servants bustling with platters of roasted meat. But behind the velvet curtain of wealth, the same old truth lurks. Hygiene does not discriminate. You tug at your collar, realizing that even royalty couldn't escape lice, fleas, and the grime of medieval life. Mainstream fact, accounts from the courts of Europe show that nobles often suffered the same infestations as peasants. Kings had lice combs in their chambers. Queens scratched their scalps beneath jewelled crowns. Henry IV of Castile was nicknamed the Impotent, not just for politics, but also because of his constant illnesses, many worsened by unsanitary living. Wealth bought spectacle, not soap. A servant rushes past carrying a perfumed cushion, spritzing it with rose water before placing it on a carved chair. Another tucks sprigs of herbs into the rushes covering the floor. You already know what that means. Yes, even in castles, rushes absorbed spills, droppings from pet animals, and years of grime. They just sprinkled lavender over it and called it fresh. Quirky tidbit. In some royal households, cats and dogs roamed freely, even on banquet tables. Queen Isabella of Spain reportedly kept lapdogs during meals, while others let more. Bonkies scamper about. You smile wryly. Imagine the royal PR team trying to spin His Majesty's monkey knocked over the roast swan. At dinner, nobles lean close, their faces painted with makeup to mask blemishes caused by poor diets and worse hygiene. They smile with teeth no cleaner than the peasant boys in the cottage earlier. A lady giggles behind her jewelled fan, but when she lowers it, you notice lice scuttling along her hairline. Historians still argue whether medieval royalty truly bathed more often than commoners. Some chronicles praise queens who loved hot baths. Others describe monarchs who bathed only a few times a year, preferring to change linen instead. Clean sheets were seen as a form of cleanliness, even if the body beneath them wasn't. You trail into the royal chambers where a massive bed dominates the room, draped with silks and furs. Servants shake out the linens, releasing a small flurry of dust. You glance closer and notice movement in the folds, bedbugs, fleas, little shadows feasting nightly on royal blood. The irony makes you chuckle softly. You could wear a crown and still share your bed with 1,000 tiny roommates. The Queen's chamber smells heavily of perfume, stronger even than what you experienced in town. Rosewater, musk, ambergris, layer upon layer of fragrance, battling the odour of bodies, dogs and chamber pots tucked behind ornate screens. You peek into a side alcove and see a gilded commode, really just a glorified chamber pot. Waste is carried away by servants and more often than not dumped into the same cesspits as everyone else's. The moat below, meant for defence, doubles as a sewage canal. Romantic in ballads, rancid in reality. One servant whispers proudly about how the king's hair is dusted with ground herbs to keep it smelling sweet. You tilt your head, wondering if anyone tells him it's not working. You picture the monarch scratching his scalp under a golden crown, muttering oaths while the court bows reverently. Third joke tonight, power may corrupt, but it definitely doesn't delouse. A memory flickers from earlier, the monk's lavender beds, the child scratching in the cottage, the barber's bloody rag. Here in the palace, you see all those threads woven together, just shinier. Nobles are human, vulnerable, and just as itchy. Wealth buys softer furs, tastier feasts, and better perfumes, but not freedom from parasites or disease. Historians still argue about how myths of royal hygiene were constructed. Some chronicles exaggerated royal cleanliness to present monarchs as almost holy. Others left us gruesome tales of lice-infested coronations or royal clothes rotting with sweat. The truth likely swayed between both extremes depending on the king, the queen, the season, or the castle. You wander back toward the great hall, where minstrels strum and dancers twirl, jewels glittering in candlelight. For a second, it dazzles you, the beauty, the power, the illusion. But then a hound jumps onto the table, snatching a pheasant leg, and the illusion shatters. Nobility lived with the same filth as everyone else, only dressed up in brocade and gold. Stepping back into the corridor, you exhale. Behind you, laughter echoes, mingled with scratching, perfume, and the faint drip of waste into the moat below. Ahead, you hear a different sound, the mutter of healers in another chamber, mixing remedies stranger than any perfume. Tonight, your journey is far from over. The royal laughter fades behind you, replaced by the rasp of grinding stone and the bubbling of simmering brews. You follow the sound into a side chamber where healers bend over wooden tables cluttered with jars, powders, and bundles of dried plants. The room smells sharp and earthy, like an apothecary colliding with a spice market, and just a little like something burning that shouldn't be. This is where medieval medicine takes center stage, a carnival of strange remedies that range from oddly insightful to completely absurd. One man carefully stirs a pot of wine laced with crushed herbs. Another hammers away at a chunk of crystal, grinding it into powder to sprinkle over a wound. A woman arranges leeches in a clay bowl, their slick bodies writhing lazily as if eager for dinner. You raise an eyebrow. In this world, pain relief doesn't mean anesthetic gas or ibuprofen. It means herbs, bleeding, and sometimes faith in whatever the neighbour swore worked for their cousin. Mainstream fact. Bloodletting was the bread and butter of medieval medicine. The belief was that health depended on balancing the body's four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of one, out came the knife. Fever, let's bleed you. Headache, let's bleed you again. Weakness, why not a third time just in case? You can imagine how well that turned out. As you linger, a healer demonstrates another technique. Cupping. He places a heated glass cup on a man's back, creating suction that leaves angry red circles behind. Supposedly, this draws out bad humours. The patient winces, but insists he feels lighter already. You shake your head, muttering that medieval medicine was basically part science, part performance art. A quirky tidbit catches your ear. A young apprentice proudly explains how they've prepared a salve of crushed emeralds mixed with honey to cure stomach ailments. Actual emeralds, ground gemstones, eaten like glittery oatmeal. You chuckle softly, imagining the world's most expensive laxative. Others used powdered coral, pearls, or even gold leaf. If nothing else, it made the patient feel like royalty while suffering. Nearby, another healer ladles out a concoction of garlic, wine, and ox bile. He swears it's the ultimate infection cure. Oddly enough, some of these recipes, especially those with garlic and vinegar, show surprising antibacterial properties when tested by modern science. Historians still argue whether medieval healers were stumbling blindly in the dark or whether centuries of observation gave them occasional hits of real effectiveness. Probably both. The line between cure and superstition was as thin as a leech's bite. You edge past a shelf stacked with dried toads, powdered bones, and jars labelled with Latin scribbles. Some remedies veer into the mystical, burning herbs to banish demons, writing charms on parchment to ward off fevers, even smearing goose fat on the chest to draw out sickness. One particularly colourful recipe advises applying a paste of pigeon droppings to swollen glands. You mutter under your breath, "I'll take the fever, thanks." The patients here are a mix: nobles with delicate ailments, peasants desperate for help, children wide-eyed as herbs are rubbed into their skin. A boy coughs violently and the healer presses a poultice of chamomile and vinegar to his chest. Will it work? Maybe. Or maybe the family will be back tomorrow, demanding a stronger charm. You pause at a bench where a healer scribbles in a manuscript. He's recording remedies meticulously, drawing little illustrations of plants and instructions. You realize that this chaos wasn't just random. Many believed they were building knowledge, connecting symptoms to treatments. And though much of it feels laughable now, some remedies, like honey for wounds, willow bark for pain, or mint for digestion, remain foundations of modern medicine. Yet even with these glimmers of sense, desperation often outpaced reason. During plague years, people wore amulets filled with ground herbs, drank potions laced with mercury, or even smeared themselves with mixtures of crushed snakes. The logic? If it stinks, burns, or sparkles, maybe it scares disease away. You rub your temple, realizing just how terrifying it must have been to live in a world where every cure was an experiment on your own body. Historians still argue whether medieval people trusted their doctors or merely tolerated them. Some records praise healers for bravery and wisdom. Others mock them as charlatans. Patients often hedged their bets, visiting both priests for blessings and healers for remedies, layering prayer on top of pigeon paste. Can you blame them? When survival is at stake, you'll try anything. As the chamber fills with the hiss of boiling mixtures, you take a cautious step back. The smell of ox bile and garlic is overwhelming, and your imagination conjures the taste. You shudder, vowing that if time travel ever becomes real, you're packing a modern first aid kit. You glance toward the window where the night air seeps in, carrying faint echoes from the streets. The palace outside may glitter with tapestries and perfume, but inside this chamber you see the truth. Illness stalked everyone, rich and poor alike, and medicine was as much about hope as healing. You exhale slowly, letting the odd symphony of bubbling pots and chanting prayers fade as you step out. The corridor ahead slopes downward, and a foul draft brushes your cheek. You recognize that smell instantly. It's not perfume, not herbs, but something raw. It's the scent of waste again, of streets that double as sewers, and you realize your walk is about to take you into the very veins of the medieval city, where sanitation, or the absence of it, shaped daily survival. The corridor's draft leads you straight back out into the veins of the town, where stone walls and alleyways funnel every odor into your path. Only this time, instead of perfumed nobles or chanting monks, you're greeted with the raw reality of medieval sanitation. Or more accurately, the lack of it. The streets themselves are the sewers, and every step forward feels like wading deeper into the intestines of the city. Your boots sink into sludge where the road narrows. A shallow channel runs along the centre, carrying a sluggish stream of waste rainwater and whatever else has been tossed from windows. People walk on either side, balancing along drier patches of straw thrown down to keep feet out of the worst of it. Horses clop through, splashing filth with every step. A cartwheel jolts into a rut, sending a spray your way. You mutter quickly, half a joke, half a prayer. Ah yes, the medieval water park. All rides are free, and all diseases included. Mainstream fact. In most medieval European cities, proper underground sewers were rare until the later Middle Ages and Renaissance. Instead, waste disposal relied on open gutters or kennels down the middle of the street. Town officials might order them cleared occasionally, but it was a losing battle. Heavy rains flushed them out, but in dry weather, the stench lingered like an unwanted houseguest. You turn a corner and spot a cesspit behind a row of houses. It's little more than a hole lined with stone, filled to the brim with waste. The smell slaps you like a wet rag. A man in ragged clothes, one of those unfortunate gong farmers, climbs out of the pit with a shovel, face pale under layers of grime. His night's work is hauling the stuff out and carting it beyond the town walls. Quirky tidbit. Gong farmers were paid surprisingly well for their revolting labour, but they had to work at night because the stench was so bad by daylight it would empty streets. Their clothes were soaked through with foulness, and laws even banned them from living inside town. You shake your head, thinking it was probably the only job where overtime smelled worse than the pay. Children dart past you, chasing each other, their bare feet splashing into puddles you'd avoid at all costs. They laugh, shriek and tumble as if the gutter were just another playground. You groan in sympathy for their immune systems, while secretly marvelling at their resilience. For them, this is normal. Life lived alongside the slurry of a city that never truly cleaned itself. Historians still argue whether townspeople really ignored the filth or whether they constantly complained. Some records show city councils issuing endless ordinances. Don't throw waste into the street. Don't slaughter animals in public squares. Don't let pigs roam free. And yet every ordinance suggests people were doing exactly that. You can imagine the cycle. A law announced, citizens nodding politely, then leaning out their windows that evening to dump their chamber pots with a satisfied splash. As you walk farther, the street narrows into a lane so foul you swear it's alive. Flies cloud the air, buzzing in lazy spirals. A butcher's shop sits at one end, animal entrails discarded in heaps. Dogs tear at scraps, growling at each other. A woman steps out to sweep, her broom doing little more than spreading the mess evenly. She looks at you, shrugs, and goes back inside. You laugh under your breath. Sometimes, even in filth, a little resignation is the only coping mechanism. You catch sight of a wooden plank bridging the central gutter, a makeshift crossing. A boy demonstrates the medieval art of leaping over waste with practiced ease. You hesitate, then give it a try. The plank wobbles but holds, and you land safely on the other side. Victory! You grin, whispering, Medieval Olympics, Event 1, gutter jump. In some parts of town, water carriers trudge with barrels, offering buckets for a fee. They fill them from streams or wells that aren't much cleaner than the gutters. People wash vegetables in the same water used for rinsing chamber pots. The irony is sharp. Survival requires water, but the water itself might kill you faster than thirst. You glance upward at a row of windows. Wooden shutters creak and you instinctively duck. This time you hear the familiar shout, "Gardyloo!" A cascade splatters into the gutter below, narrowly missing you. You shake your head, muttering, "Better late than never." The passerby chuckles at your reaction. It's all routine for them. For you, it's another reminder that in this city, the sky rains more than just water. Historians still debate how medieval sanitation shaped urban health. Some argue people built immunity over time, while others point to constant outbreaks of dysentery, cholera-like illnesses, and, of course, plague. Whatever the truth, it's clear the streets themselves were both arteries of commerce and veins of disease, pumping filth as much as goods and gossip. As you leave the lane, your boots caked and your nose thoroughly assaulted, you step into a wider square where couples stroll and vendors shout. Life buzzes here as if the filth doesn't exist, as if people simply learned to live alongside it, and maybe they did. You take one last look at the gutter trailing behind you like a shadow and think, it wasn't just streets, they were mirrors of how survival worked here, messy, smelly, but endlessly persistent. And as you turn away, laughter from the square drifts over you, mingling with the faint scent of roasting meat. It almost masks the stink, almost. You smile wryly and step forward, ready to discover how even love and marriage in this world couldn't escape the power of smell. The square fills with the warm glow of torches and the hum of music. A fiddler scrapes a lively tune, and couples sway awkwardly on the cobblestones. You smile at the scene, romance in the Middle Ages, a chance to forget filth for an evening. But as you draw closer, a less charming truth wafts into your nose. Courtship here isn't about sparkling smiles or crisp cologne, it's about smell. You sidle past a group of young men leaning against a tavern wall, each trying his best to look dashing. Their tunics are patched, their boots caked, but what truly marks them is the odour. One reeks of stale ale, another of garlic and onions, another of horse sweat. And yet a giggling group of women lingers nearby, pretending not to notice. Mainstream fact, in an era without toothpaste or deodorant, natural body odor played a huge role in attraction. People expected it. A healthy smell was considered appealing. A foul one signaled disease. So, yes, sniffing your potential partner was part of the medieval dating ritual. A man offers his hand to a young woman, and she takes it, discreetly lifting it to her nose before they dance. You chuckle. No swiping left here, just a quick scent check. Quirky tidbit. Some folk remedies for love involved brewing odor potions. Women wore sachets of rosemary or violet under their dresses to sweeten their scent, while men chewed parsley or cloves before meeting a sweetheart. One record even suggests carrying a slice of apple in your armpit during a feast, then offering it to your beloved to eat. You wince and whisper, "That's not love, that's hazing." As the music swells, you watch the crowd more closely. Their teeth, crooked and stained, don't seem to matter much. Their clothes, dusty and flea-ridden, are overlooked. What counts is whether you can stand next to someone without gagging. Historians still argue whether medieval society consciously judged partners by odour or whether it was just instinct. But either way, the nose ruled. Inside the tavern, the air thickens with ale, smoke and sweat. Couples sneak glances over mugs, leaning close to whisper. You catch snippets, promises of land, family alliances, dowry negotiations hidden beneath flirtatious banter. Marriage here isn't just about romance, it's about survival. Families barter children like assets, sealing alliances with vows and feasts. Love is a bonus if it comes along, but smell, that's immediate, unavoidable chemistry. At the far table, a bard sings of knights and maidens, his voice carrying tales of courtly love, pure, noble, untouchable. You almost laugh because outside these verses, the reality is far less polished. The maiden's dress may be soaked in lavender, but beneath it, weeks of unwashed skin linger. The knight may wear a scented pomander, but under his armour sweat festers in every crevice. The ballad sells fantasy, the room reeks of reality. You notice one couple slipping outside into the moonlight. The man plucks a sprig of mint from his pouch, chewing it quickly before leaning in to whisper. The woman smiles, forgiving whatever garlic clung to him before. You realise that in a way, these little gestures were their version of breath mints, perfumes, even deodorant. Small, imperfect acts of courtesy wrapped in herbs. The music and laughter of the square fade into silence as the silhouette of the castle swells before you. Its thick walls rise high into the night, torches flickering along the battlements, and you step through a gatehouse where guards eye you with suspicion. Inside, the air smells faintly of damp stone, straw, and something else. Sharper. You wrinkle your nose, following the scent until you stumble across one of the most peculiar features of medieval architecture, the garderobe. From the outside, a garderobe looks like a small stone balcony or turret jutting from the wall. You lean closer and notice a narrow slit in the floor, dropping straight down. Yes, this is a medieval toilet. Waste falls through the hole, tumbling into the moat or a pit below. You glance down, half curious, half horrified. The moonlight catches ripples of water far below, dark and sluggish. You mutter under your breath, "Romantic dinner by the moat? Hard pass." Mainstream fact: garderobes were standard in castles, placed in outer walls so waste could be carried away by rain or washed into moats. Some were even built with chutes leading into rivers. The idea was simple: out of sight, out of mind, but sanitation still non-existent. Moats often became open cesspools, breeding foul odours and disease. Defenders might have relied on them for security, but attackers would have smelled them long before they saw them. You peek into one chamber where a wooden bench with a round hole sits neatly over the chute. It looks deceptively civilized, almost like an early porta-potty, but the smell gives it away. Servants sprinkle herbs or straw to soften the odor, but it lingers, a constant reminder that royal life had its dirty corners. Quirky tidbit: guardrobes were also believed to repel moths from clothing. Lords sometimes stored garments in nearby closets, trusting that the stench kept pests away. Yes, imagine telling guests, "I keep my fine silk right next to the loo, keeps it fresh." As you wander through the corridors, you notice garderobes tucked in surprising places, at the end of hallways, in towers, even hidden behind tapestries. Privacy wasn't as strict as you'd expect. Doors were flimsy or absent, and servants often shared the same facilities as their masters. You picture a knight clanking in, lifting his armour awkwardly, while a page whistles nervously outside. Romance of chivalry meet reality of plumbing. Historians still argue whether garderobes improved hygiene or merely centralised the problem. On one hand, they kept chamber pots out of living spaces. On the other, they dumped everything into moats that were sometimes used for drinking water or fishing. Archaeological digs have found parasite eggs in moat sediments, proving that castles were breeding grounds for illness. You shake your head, realizing that living behind thick stone walls didn't mean escaping filth, it just meant relocating it. You approach a particularly grand garderobe reserved for the lord of the castle. Its walls are plastered, its seat padded with a cushion. A small window lets in fresh air and a view of the countryside. For a brief second, you imagine a medieval ruler gazing out at his lands while, multitasking. Third joke of the night, talk about ruling with a seat of power. Down in the courtyard you glimpse the moat itself. It glistens faintly in the torchlight, but the smell carries clearly even from here. Frogs croak, insects swarm, and you can't help but wonder how many castle romances began with whispers of love while the moat burbled away beneath. Servants hurry past, carrying buckets to dump ashes or lime into cesspits, a desperate attempt to dull the stench. Others haul water from the well, careful not to draw too close to the moat. Everyone knows it's tainted, but water is water, and sometimes necessity outweighs disgust. You wonder how many knights fell ill not from battle wounds, but from the water drawn in desperation. Inside, the echo of dripping water follows you through the halls, a constant reminder that waste was never far away. You think back to the smoky cottages, the chamber pots, the gutters in the streets. It all ties together. Castles may have looked like bastions of order and grandeur, but their garderobes tell the truth. Everyone, from kings to peasants, was united by the same struggle against filth. Historians still debate whether medieval people tolerated the stench more easily or if they constantly sought ways to escape it. Some writings suggest nobles hung herbs by garderobes and burned incense nearby. Others imply they shrugged and carried on. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in the middle, a mix of resignation and creative masking. You step back into the great hall, where torches flicker and laughter echoes. The nobles here strut proudly, their silks rustling, their goblets full. Yet just a few feet away, garderobes drain quietly into moats that stink beneath the stars. The contrast makes you grin wryly. Castles might have been symbols of power, but even the most powerful throne didn't come with flushing. As you glance one last time toward the outer wall, you know the world is shifting. Change is on the horizon. Ideas of cleanliness, health, and bathing will slowly return with the Renaissance. But before that, the Middle Ages will trudge onward, one garderobe at a time. The castle walls loom behind you as you step into the night, but the air feels different now, lighter, almost charged. The world is on the cusp of change, and though the cobbled streets still carry their slurry of waste and the cottages still buzz with fleas, whispers of something new begin to drift through taverns and town squares. You sense it in the air, the rise of new ideals about what it means to be clean. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, a slow rediscovery of bathing emerges, nudged along by trade, scholarship, and curiosity about the ancient world. In Florence, Venice, and other thriving cities, manuscripts from classical Rome circulate once more, praising the virtues of water and balance. You imagine a scholar leaning over a parchment, tracing lines that describe Roman baths and sighing wistfully, maybe we lost something worth bringing back. Mainstream fact, the Renaissance saw a growing interest in personal hygiene, tied to ideas of health, beauty, and civility. Doctors began recommending more frequent washing, at least of hands and faces, if not full baths. Nobles embraced linen undergarments not just as status symbols, but as a layer that could be changed and laundered more often. In France and Italy, perfumed baths made a cautious return among the wealthy, who dipped in warm water scented with rosemary, rose petals, or even slices of lemon carried over trade routes. You follow the scent of citrus through a courtyard where a copper tub glints in the lamplight. Servants pour steaming water, tossing in sprigs of thyme and chamomile. A merchant lowers himself into the bath, sighing with theatrical relief. You grin. After centuries of fear that bathing opened pores to disease, people are reclaiming the simple joy of hot water. Still, not everyone is convinced. Historians still argue whether most Europeans truly bathed more often in this period, or whether it was largely confined to elites, with peasants sticking to their cloth-wiping routines. Nearby, a barber surgeon mutters about humours while rinsing his hands in a basin. Even medicine begins to shift, blending ancient theories with newer observations. Some doctors preach the benefits of clean skin for regulating temperature and expelling toxins. Others insist baths spread disease. The debate ripples through households, leaving families to decide whether to fill the tub or avoid it like sin. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. In Renaissance France, some nobles developed elaborate toilette rituals where servants presented basins of scented water each morning for hand-washing and face-wiping. These routines weren't private at all. Courtiers gathered to watch, treating hygiene as theatre, a way to display refinement. You chuckle. Imagine an audience clapping politely as you rinse your face with rose water. Bravissimo! Such clean cheeks. You walk past a tailor's shop where bolts of fine linen hang in the window. Linen becomes more than fabric, it's hygiene strategy. Unlike wool or fur, it can be laundered, boiled, bleached in the sun. Nobles stockpile dozens of shirts and chemises, changing daily, while peasants dream of just one extra set. Some even believed that changing linen was as cleansing as bathing, the cloth magically drawing out sweat and dirt from the skin. Not entirely wrong, though you mutter wryly that a bath wouldn't hurt either. The city streets shift with these new ideals. Perfume remains important, but now it partners with water instead of replacing it entirely. Wealthy women bathe their hair with rosemary rinses, men soak tired feet after long rides, and communal bathhouses in some regions reopen with stricter rules. You picture a sign nailed to the door. No indecency, no disease, just hot water. Whether it worked is another matter. Historians still argue whether these changes truly improved health or whether they were cosmetic, more about appearance and class than sanitation. After all, waste still flowed in gutters, guardrobes still dumped into moats, and plague still lurked in fleas. But compared to the world you've trudged through, even these small shifts feel like a revolution. You stop at a fountain in the town square where artisans carved marble figures of nymphs and lions spouting water. Children splash their hands, merchants rinse fruit. A lady fills a jug with careful precision. For the first time in your journey, water here feels less like a threat and more like a gift. You lean down, cup your hands, and let the coolness wash your face. It's not sparkling clean, but in this moment it feels like a promise that someday the world will understand the value of true hygiene. The air smells fresher as you continue walking, herbs still burning in doorways, but with something gentler beneath. Hope. It lingers with you as you glance toward the horizon where caravans carry silks, spices, and yes, new ideas from abroad. Because while Europe stumbles toward cleanliness, other parts of the world have already woven it into daily life. And soon you'll see just how stark the contrast can be. The horizon glows faintly as dawn brushes the rooftops, and you find yourself wandering beyond the familiar stink of European towns. The streets here grow quieter, the architecture shifts, and scents in the air change too. Less sewage, more spice, more incense. You're not in Paris, London, or Florence anymore. Your journey now takes you across borders to glimpse how other cultures handled the question of hygiene, and suddenly Europe's filth doesn't look so inevitable. Mainstream fact: in the Islamic world, bathing was woven into religious practice. The Quran requires ritual washing before prayer, and so cities from Cairo to Damascus to Cordoba built public bathhouses, hammams, that became central to daily life. You close your eyes and imagine stepping into one. The walls gleam with tiles, steam rises from hot pools, and attendants ladle water gently over your shoulders. The air smells of sandalwood and olive soap, rich and clean. Here, bathing isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated, both for health and for spirituality. You peek through a doorway and see rows of carved basins, copper vessels filled with water perfumed with herbs. Men sit cross-legged, scrubbing diligently, while attendants massage oils into skin. Women, in their own quarters, chat and laugh as they wash away dust and fatigue. You smile, realizing that for many cultures, cleanliness really was next to godliness, long before Europe rediscovered the idea. Meanwhile, in Japan, bathing had long been a daily ritual. Hot springs or onsen dotted the landscape, their mineral-rich waters considered curative. Even in modest homes, buckets of hot water were poured over the body in ritual ablutions. You imagine steam curling in bamboo bathhouses, mingling with the sound of cicadas, and think, this is worlds away from chamber pots flying out windows. Quirky tidbit. In some Middle Eastern bathhouses, attendants suffered exfoliation with rough mitts, sloughing off layers of dead skin until you felt brand new. Patrons left not only scrubbed but perfumed with rose oil or jasmine. Compare that to Europe, where perfume masked dirt rather than followed cleansing, and you can see the stark cultural gap. Historians still argue why European hygiene lagged while other cultures flourished. Was it religion? Christian suspicion of communal nudity? Was it economics? Less access to fuel and water infrastructure? Or was it simply habit, entrenched by centuries of fear that baths spread disease? Whatever the reason, stepping across these cultural borders feels like opening a window. You trail into a courtyard where fountains bubble gently, their water clear, cool, inviting. Children play nearby, splashing their faces without fear. A woman waters herbs growing in pots, basil and mint adding freshness to the morning air. You breathe in, feeling your lungs unclench, and realize just how much Europe's grime had weighed on you. This world feels lighter, balanced, as if people here saw water not as a danger, but as life itself. And yet, even here, hygiene is imperfect. Waste still accumulates in markets, animals still share streets, and diseases still exist. But the difference is striking. Ritual and infrastructure combine to make washing routine, communal, even joyful. You chuckle softly, thinking how Europe's nobles bragged about perfumed gloves, while in other lands, ordinary people soaked in scented baths as part of daily life. A caravan passes through the square, laden with silks and spices, and you wonder how many Europeans glimpsed these practices during travel, knights on crusade, merchants along trade routes, and what they thought. Did they return home, bragging about scented baths? Did they secretly long for them as they pulled lice from their collars? Historians still debate whether cross-cultural contact influenced Europe's gradual rediscovery of bathing in the Renaissance, or whether Europe stubbornly resisted lessons from abroad. As the caravan disappears, you feel the tug of travel once more. You've seen cottages smoky with animals, monasteries rinsing in lavender basins, palaces perfumed to disguise filth, and now cultures that treated bathing as a joy instead of a sin. The contrast is dizzying, and yet, through it all, one truth shines. People everywhere searched for ways to cope with dirt, disease, and dignity. You glance back westward toward the medieval streets you came from. They're still there, muddy, stinking, scratching. But the air you breathe now carries rosemary, jasmine, cedar. It smells like possibility. You smile faintly, knowing that history isn't uniform, and that while one corner of the world drowned in filth, another was already swimming in clarity. Ahead, your road bends again, leading you back toward Europe's tangled debates. Because as clean as some worlds were, the question remains, what did medieval people themselves think about their own stench? Did they even notice it, or did their senses simply tune it out? That debate is waiting just around the corner. You drift back toward Europe, carrying with you the memory of jasmine-scented steam and cedarwood courtyards, and the contrast makes the medieval streets feel even heavier than before. The muck, the chamber pots, the fleas, it all presses in again, and you find yourself asking the same question scholars have chewed on for centuries. Did medieval people actually notice how disgusting their world was? Or did they adapt so completely that the stench, the grime, the crawling pests simply became invisible? Mainstream fact. Historians have long debated whether hygiene in the Middle Ages was as abysmal as the stereotypes suggest. On one side, accounts from travellers, especially those from the Middle East, describe European towns as unbearably filthy, with waste in the streets and foul-smelling crowds. On the other, there are records of ordinances about cleaning, descriptions of laundry days, and even reports of occasional baths. Some scholars argue the filthy Middle Ages is partly a myth exaggerated by later critics, especially Enlightenment writers who wanted to portray the medieval period as backward compared to their modern age. You step into a tavern where men and women drink, laugh, and sweat in close quarters. The smell makes you gag, but the locals seem unfazed. A serving girl balances mugs of ale with ease, ducking under rafters black with smoke. You lean closer, sniffing her sleeve, faintly perfumed with lavender water. A little gesture, a small fight against the tide. Did she think it made her clean? Did it? A quirky tidbit, medieval literature sometimes pokes fun at smell, hinting that people weren't completely nose-blind. In the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer describes a cook with a mormal, a festering sore, that taints the food he serves. Writers joked about smelly friars, rancid taverns, and foul kitchens, so they clearly noticed odours, enough to make them punchlines. But the question remains, how seriously did they take them? You wander back outside and pass a washerwoman beating cloth in a trough. She grimaces at the muddy water but shrugs and keeps scrubbing. For her, clean might mean less dirt than yesterday, not spotless linen by modern standards. And that's the heart of the debate. Was medieval cleanliness relative? Did a quick rinse with scented water feel like a luxury when your neighbour hadn't rinsed at all? Historians still argue about immunity too. Did medieval people literally stop smelling the filth because they grew accustomed? Or did their noses function just like yours, but resignation dulled the reaction? Some point out that visitors from abroad often wrote shocked descriptions of European towns, which suggests at least some outsiders found it unbearable. Meanwhile, locals wrote less about the stink, perhaps because it wasn't worth mentioning if it was everywhere, every day. You pause at a well where a boy scoops a bucket of cloudy water. He gulps it down cheerfully, then splashes his face with the rest. You wince, but he grins, wiping his mouth. Maybe he's never tasted clean water, never felt what you would call freshness. Maybe his baseline is simply different. That thought sits heavy with you. How much of disgust is cultural, how much is universal? A minstrel strums a lute nearby, singing a ballad of love and valour. His audience claps along, swaying happily, though the air reeks of sweat, ale and smoke. You smile despite yourself. If they can laugh in the middle of this, maybe that's the answer. They noticed the stench, yes, but they didn't let it dominate their lives. Disgust faded into background noise, a hum beneath the music. Yet part of you wonders, would a medieval traveller suddenly dropped into a modern subway find our world just as strange? Historians debate whether our obsession with showers, soap and hand sanitizer will someday look excessive, even neurotic. Perhaps in 1,000 years, future historians will chuckle, can you believe they scrubbed themselves daily with synthetic gels and panicked over germs too small to see? You chuckle softly, realizing the debate stretches beyond history. It touches on human adaptability itself. We survive what we must, we normalize what surrounds us, and we joke about it to cope. Remember that chamber pot splash you dodged earlier? To them, that was just Tuesday. As you continue down the lane, the night grows quieter. You pass windows glowing faintly, hear a baby cry, smell a pot of onions simmering. Life goes on, filth or no filth, and you realize that whether or not they noticed the stench, medieval people carried on, married, laughed, feasted, prayed, died, and dreamed. Disgust didn't stop them, it just became part of the scenery. Historians still argue, but walking in their shoes or their mud-caked boots, you've seen enough to know one thing: adaptation is the greatest hygiene of all. You take a deep breath, the smell as heavy as ever, and step forward. One more bend in the road, and you'll be leaving this world behind. The disgust will fade, the noise will soften, and you'll ease into the calm of sleep, grateful that your nose belongs firmly in the modern age. The lane bends gently, and with it the soundscape of the medieval town softens. The clang of ironmongers, the bray of donkeys, the shouts of vendors, these fade into a distant murmur. The air still carries its heavy mix of smoke, sweat, and waste, but even that begins to lose its bite. You slow your steps, feeling the weight of the journey settle into your shoulders, and realize you've wandered through a world of grime, stench, and strange resilience. Yet here, at the edge of town, something shifts. You look back once toward the crooked streets and castle towers, and the images roll through your mind. Chamber pots flying from windows, fleas hopping from robes, nobles fumbling with perfumed pomanders, barbers with razors and leeches, monks scrubbing in lavender water, peasants curled up beside pigs, and lovers sniffing each other for suitability. Every detail you've trudged through paints a world that was messy, pungent, and dangerous. And yet, it was also a world that endured. Mainstream fact: by the end of the Middle Ages, new currents, Renaissance learning, trade, and cross-cultural contact were already shifting ideas about hygiene and health. Slowly, people began to rediscover the value of bathing, of linen, of water as more than a threat. Centuries of filth didn't vanish overnight, but the seeds of change were sown. A quirky tidbit flits into your mind one last time. Some nobles believed rubbing their bodies with crushed rubies or wearing perfumed gloves could protect against plague. Ridiculous by today's standards, yet strangely poetic. Humans forever reaching for beauty as a shield against decay. Historians still argue whether medieval life was as universally filthy as legend suggests, or whether we exaggerate for effect. But you've walked the alleys, felt the crunch of fleas, and heard the splash of waste, and the debate doesn't matter much anymore. What matters is the texture of life as it was: heavy, foul, resilient, and endlessly human. You step beyond the town gates, the countryside opening wide. Fields stretch under moonlight, whispering with wind. The air smells clearer, touched with hay and damp earth. It feels like the first deep breath you've had in hours, maybe days. And in that clarity, the disgust slowly loosens its grip. Your shoulders ease, your pace slows, and the world quiets to a murmur fit for sleep. Now the wind down begins, soft and slow, easing you out of the muck and into calm. The night deepens around you, its silence a balm after the chaos of streets and smells. Each step you take is lighter than the last, as if the filth of the medieval world sloughs off behind you, left in gutters and moats, gone with the tide of history. The fields sway gently under starlight, and the air brushes your face, cool and steady, rinsing away the heaviness. You picture water again, but not the brown, risky wells of the town. Instead, imagine a clear spring bubbling over smooth stones, its sound soft and even like a lullaby. The water glistens under moonlight, untouched by hands or buckets, as clean as your breath in this moment. You linger there in your mind, cupping your hands, drinking deeply, feeling refreshed. Your body loosens as though it too has been rinsed, shoulders softening, jaw unclenching, chest rising and falling in long, easy waves. Each inhale draws in cool, fresh air. Each exhale releases a little more of the day's weight. The imagery fades gently. The rats, the chamber pots, the garderobes all blur and dissolve into the background, no longer vivid, no longer sharp. What remains is peace. The world grows slower, softer. Your footsteps barely touch the earth now. Stars shimmer above, steady and patient, their light guiding you into stillness. The faint hum of night, the whisper of wind, the sigh or grass becomes the only sound. You close your eyes, letting the medieval grime slip away entirely. Ahead is only calm, only rest. The journey has carried you through filth and laughter, stench and resilience, but now it delivers you gently to quiet. So let yourself drift, safe and easy. The world is clean again, soft again, ready to cradle you in sleep.